Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you let them into the corners of your life you'd never shown anyone else? Not just the good parts and the stupid, messy, scared parts. The parts you hide even from yourself. If you have, you'll understand this feeling. The quiet warmth of being known. The way it loosens your shoulders. The way it makes the world feel smaller, safer. That's what she did to me. She didn't just enter my life. She settled into it, like somebody who planned to never leave. She looked me in the eyes and said the things everyone wants to hear. I love you. I'll be with you. I won't let you down. Simple words. Soft words. The kind that make the loudest fears quiet for a while. I believed her. I needed to believe her. But here's the thing about words. They can be gentle, and they can be weapons. She used both. I only realized later how carefully she chose each one. How she arranged them so they would land exactly where I wanted to be touched. How she learned my weaknesses and pressed them like keys on a piano. And every time I smiled back, she watched as if she were studying a performance she could manipulate. You ever get that little twist in your stomach? The one that tells you something is off, but you ignore it because the rest feels so right? I felt that twist many times. Little things. A missed call. A text that didn't sound like her. An excuse about work that landed wrong. I saw shadows where there should have been light. But when you're in love, you teach yourself how to look the other way. You become an expert at convincing yourself you're seeing only what you want to see. Then one night changed everything. It wasn't dramatic in the moment. No shouting. No slammed doors. It was quieter, lonelier, and worse. It was a betrayal wrapped in normalcy. She told me she'd be home early. She promised a cozy night on the couch. She kissed my forehead like she meant it. I slept thinking about how lucky I was. I woke up to a lie. Small, simple, unforgivable. She wasn't home. Not even close. Her laugh that night, the one I heard on a video that wasn't supposed to exist, was laughing with someone else. Her hand was holding someone else's. And the face that had sworn never to hurt me looked at the camera like she had no idea what she'd already destroyed. You might think the worst part is the act itself. But for me, the worst part was the look. She looked at me later when I asked her why, and she told me with a lightness I still can't forget. Why would I lie to you? The question was a lie wrapped in innocence. And it landed like a blow. I remember standing frozen, like a photograph, while 1,000 small memories of trust rearranged themselves into a mosaic of deceit. The laugh we shared. The promises whispered late at night. The future I had started drawing in my head. They all began to look like props in a scene I never auditioned for. That's when something inside me shifted. Not into bitterness at first, just clarity. When a person you trusted shows you their true colors, you get a choice. You can react with heat, with the immediate rush of anger and pain that wants everything to end in fire. Or you can react with ice, slow, calculated, deliberate. I chose the latter. Not because I didn't feel pain. I did. Deeply. But pain makes mistakes. Patience makes plans. Let me be clear. Revenge wasn't my first thought. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to ruin a life. I wanted answers. I wanted honesty. I wanted what was promised to me. When she lied again, with that same casual smile, I realized honesty wouldn't come. She had practiced lying so often it had become part of her language. So, if honesty would not arrive willingly, I would make the truth impossible to ignore. Here's the secret about liars. They're most dangerous when they're not believed to be liars. People like to see what they want. They cover the gaps with assumptions. They make excuses because it's easier to keep the comfortable illusion than to face the ugly mess. That's why exposing a lie takes more than shouting. It takes proof. It takes patience. It takes constructing a moment so undeniable the liar can no longer twist reality. I began to watch. Quietly. Patiently. Not out of spite, but out of a strange devotion to fairness. To myself. I recorded things she didn't know she'd left on display. I kept little notes. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because I wanted to know the whole story before I tore the front off of it. If I was going to break the mirror, I wanted to do it with the full picture in my hands. You might think that makes me cold. Maybe it does. Or maybe it makes me someone who refuses to be a joke. The more I collected, the more the pattern became clear. The smiling face she showed me, and the other face she showed the world, were two different versions of the same person. One was gentle, comforting, the version I had fallen for. The other was a performer, slick, rehearsed, and always a step ahead of any suspicion. And in that quiet work of gathering proof, something unexpected happened. I stopped wanting to catch her in the act just to hurt her. I started wanting to save myself. There is a strange kind of strength that comes from knowing. Knowledge is not only power, it is the doorway back to yourself. Every message, every photo, every small inconsistency I pinned down became another plank in the bridge I was building. The bridge that would carry me forward, away from her web. Maybe you've been in this place before, the slow realization that someone you trusted has been living a lie. Maybe you wonder what to do. Heat or ice? The answer isn't simple. But if there's one thing I learned in those first dark hours after the truth, it's this. The loudest victory is the one that leaves you standing taller at the end. Not because the other person has fallen, but because you've reclaimed your life from the mess they made of it. So I waited. I watched. I learned the rhythm of her deceit. I watched how she treated promises like disposable things, how she polished her stories until they glinted like new coins. And as I watched, I planned. I didn't plan vengeance for the sake of cruelty. I planned a reckoning that would make lying impossible, not by force, but by making the truth so obvious no one could ignore it. There's an art to this kind of quiet warfare. It's built on restraint. It's built on assembling the hard facts until the house of cards she'd stacked up would collapse under its own weight. And when the collapse comes, you don't have to shout. The silence after the fall says more than any scream ever could. Listen. Before I go on, there's one thing I want you to hold on to. This is not a story of petty retribution. This is a story about what happens when you protect your heart by becoming wise about who gets to hold it. It's about the moment you decide that being played for a fool is not an option. It's about planning a way out that makes sense, that honors your pain without letting it own you. In the next part, I'll take you back to the beginning, to the first days of light and laughter, so you can see how patient deception looked like love. I'll show you the little choices she made that led to the big one, and why seeing the whole picture mattered so much. Because only when you understand the depth of her lies will you understand why my plan had to be perfect. Are you ready to go back? It started so simple, almost too simple. I wasn't looking for anything at the time. My life was already messy enough, responsibilities weighing me down, unanswered questions about where I was going, nights that felt too long and mornings that felt too heavy. Romance, commitment. Those weren't even on my list. I wasn't searching. I wasn't hoping. And that's usually when it happens, isn't it? When you're not looking. That's when someone appears. She came into my life like sunlight breaking through a storm. Not the blinding kind, but the soft kind. The kind that slips past the clouds and rests gently on your skin. The kind that makes you stop, breathe, and think, maybe things will be okay after all. She laughed at my jokes. Not the forced, polite laugh people use when they don't want to be rude. No, she laughed like she actually enjoyed it, like I was genuinely funny, like I was someone worth paying attention to. She remembered the little things too, the way I took my coffee, the story I told once about an embarrassing mistake I made years ago. Even the small dream I had, one I admitted in passing, something I thought she'd forget the moment I said it. But later she brought it up again, like it mattered to her. Like I mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. That's how she pulled me in. Not with grand gestures, not with overwhelming passion, but with the quiet, steady attention that makes you feel safe. The kind that whispers, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Slowly, without even realizing it, I let my guard down. I started telling her about my struggles. The things I usually kept locked inside. She listened with such focus, her head tilted slightly, her eyes locked onto mine as if every word I spoke was important. I told her about my scars, my fears, the nights I stayed awake questioning if I was enough, and she didn't flinch. She didn't judge. She just nodded, smiled, and reached across the space between us, as if her presence alone could take some of the weight off my shoulders. I told her about my dreams. 2, the fragile ones, the ones I was too scared to admit out loud to anyone else. She leaned in closer when I spoke, like she wanted to hold those dreams with me, protect them from the world. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like comfort. Every phrase was carefully wrapped in reassurance. When she said, "You're stronger than you think," I believed her. When she whispered, "I'll always be here," I wanted to believe her even more. And the one thing she said most often, the one phrase that became like a spell on my heart, was this: "Trust me." 2 simple words. And every time she said them, I did, because why wouldn't I? Why would someone look you in the eyes with that kind of softness and lie? Why would someone pretend to care so deeply when all you've given them is your truth, your raw, unpolished self? That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who earn your trust so carefully, so deliberately, that you stop questioning their intentions. Little did I know. While I was opening doors to let her in, she was already weaving her web, and by the time I realized it, I was caught. At first, it was nothing. Nothing worth losing sleep over. Just little things, the kind of details you brush aside because you don't want to seem paranoid. She'd say she was busy, too busy to talk, too busy to meet. But when I glanced at my phone, there she was. Online, not just once, for hours. The glowing green dot staring back at me like a quiet warning. She'd tell me she was at home, her voice calm, casual, almost bored. But the background told another story. The clink of dishes in a cafe. The faint hum of music too polished to be from her living room. The sound of laughter, not hers, not mine, lingering just long enough to plant doubt in my mind. I told myself it didn't matter. Don't overthink this. She wouldn't lie to you. Not her. Not the person who said you're everything. I wanted to believe that, desperately. But then came the stories. Excuses. That didn't fit together. Timelines. That overlapped. Events that she swore happened one way, only for a detail to slip and betray her later, and the way she told them. That's what made it worse. Her words felt rehearsed. Perfectly arranged, too polished. Like she had practiced them in front of a mirror before handing them to me. Gift-wrapped and ready. The pauses weren't natural. The smiles came a second too late. The tone was a shade too smooth. It was like watching someone perform a role they'd memorized, rather than speaking from the heart. And yet, whenever I gathered the courage to ask her, to push back, to say, "That doesn't sound right," she never flinched. Instead, she'd reach for my hand, her fingers warm, steady, wrapping around mine with practiced tenderness. She'd look me dead in the eyes, her voice soft, almost breaking. "Why would I ever lie to you? You're everything to me." And in that moment, the world seemed to pause. Because the human heart wants so badly to believe. I wanted to believe her. Of course I did. Because when you care about someone, isn't it easier to trust them than to face the truth? Isn't it easier to silence that whisper in your gut than to imagine the person you love could be smiling at you while hiding a knife behind their back? So I convinced myself. I silenced the doubts. I swallowed the unease and called it love. But deep down, the cracks were there. Silent at first. Hairline fractures spreading slowly across what I thought was solid ground, and I knew sooner or later something was going to break, because lies don't stay buried forever. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just scratch the surface, it would shatter everything. The first betrayal, the breaking point. The day it all changed didn't come with thunder. It didn't announce itself with lightning or warning signs. No, it came disguised as ordinary. She had promised to spend the evening with me. Her words were gentle, comforting, the kind of promise that makes you relax. She even swore she was home resting. too tired to go anywhere. I pictured her curled up under a blanket, maybe scrolling through her phone, maybe drifting off to sleep. But something inside me stirred. A whisper. A knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. You ever get that feeling? That quiet voice that says, check, something isn't right. Most of the time, we ignore it. We bury it under trust, under love, under the belief that our person wouldn't do that to us. But that night, I listened, so I checked, and what I found froze me in place. There she was, not at home, not resting, not tired at all. She was out, laughing, smiling, her hand laced comfortably with someone else's, like it belonged there. I stood there, silent, my chest tightening until it felt like I couldn't breathe. And the strange part? It wasn't even seeing her with him that broke me. It was the memory of just hours earlier, the way she had looked me in the eyes, her voice calm, her face serene, and lied. Without a blink. Without hesitation. Without even the smallest crack in her mask. Do you know what that feels like? To realize someone has become so fluent in deceit that lying to your face is as natural to them as breathing? When I confronted her later, I wanted, at the very least, a flicker of guilt, a stumble in her words, a shadow of shame in her eyes. But instead, she didn't even flinch, she didn't tremble, she didn't stutter, she just smiled, tilted her head ever so slightly, and lied again. You're imagining things. Why don't you trust me? You know I love you. As if my eyes hadn't seen what they'd seen. As if my gut hadn't already told me the truth. As if reality itself could be rewritten by her calm, practiced tone. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in rage. Not in screaming. It was quieter than that. Colder. I realized this wasn't love. This wasn't trust. This wasn't even a relationship. Built on shaky ground. It was a game. A game she had been playing with me all along. And me? I was just a pawn. A piece she moved around the board whenever it suited her. But not anymore. That was the moment. The moment I chose clarity over denial. The moment I understood that if she could lie to my face with that kind of ease. Then the rules had changed. She thought she held the pieces. She thought I'd keep playing along. But she was wrong. Because I don't crumble. I don't break. And from that moment forward, the game wasn't hers anymore, it was mine. I didn't shout. There was no late-night argument. No dramatic confrontation. I didn't cry on the kitchen floor or beg for the truth. I didn't hand her the power of my pain. What I did was smile. Not the kind of smile that forgives. Not the kind that says everything's okay. This was a quiet, small smile. The one that comes from knowing something no one else does. It was the calm before a storm I planned to let unfold on its own. If lies were her weapon, then patience would be mine. Because here's the thing about revenge, the kind that actually matters. It isn't born from fury. It's born from control. It's born from the decision that you won't be played again. Anger is noisy, and noise gives away your position. Silence keeps you invisible. Waiting turns impulse into strategy. Planning turns pain into purpose. So I played along. I let her think she'd won. I answered calls with the same warmth I'd always shown. I met her for coffee, smiled at the little jokes, held hands when she reached out. I let her see me as the same person she thought was easy to fool. I wanted her to relax, to slip into the comfortable rhythm of her deceit, because complacency makes mistakes obvious. Behind that courteous face, though I was building something precise, first I cataloged every inconsistency, every flippant excuse, every I was home that didn't align with the timestamps I'd saved. I made lists, not to torment her, but to make sense of the pattern. Dates, times, screenshots, photos, small things most people dismiss as nothing. But when arranged in a line, they begin to tell a story. Second, I collected witnesses, not people to confront her, but people whose words would be impossible to twist later. Friends who had seen her laugh in places she said she wasn't. a barista who recognized her regular presence, a mutual acquaintance who had unknowingly filled the gaps in her lies. Nothing sensational. Just facts. Grounded, ordinary facts that don't look like a grudge. They look like proof. Third, I rehearsed my silence. I practiced not answering the bait she threw at me. The passive-aggressive messages, the flattering apologies, the sudden offers to talk. I let them hang in the air. I let her wonder why I wasn't reacting. Because a liar depends on your reaction to survive. Remove the reaction, and the liar is forced to change the script, often sloppily. Fourth, I created a stage. Not a public spectacle, not a social media ambush. I designed a moment where truth would be undeniable and where she would have nowhere to hide, not because I yelled, but because the facts themselves would speak so loudly they'd drown every rehearsed lie. A place, a time, a handful of people who would see the pattern and understand what I understood. There was also a softer part to the plan, a safeguard for me. I didn't want revenge to drag me into bitterness, so I scheduled my own escape routes. Evenings with friends who didn't know her, small trips to clear my head, workouts that let me pour energy into motion instead of rumination. I wanted to be sharp, not broken. Clear, not consumed. And the strangest thing happened while I waited. Patience didn't make me colder. It made me clearer. The fog of betrayal thinned, and I could see every seam in her story. I could see how she stitched people together into the life she wanted to present. I could see where the threads crossed and where they failed. Day by day, piece by piece, the plan took shape. It wasn't a dramatic blueprint scrawled on a table. It was quiet, methodical, almost surgical. I mapped out times. I rehearsed phrases to stay neutral. I arranged for the right people to be present. I made sure that when the moment came, there would be no room for excuses. And when that moment finally arrived, when I sat across from her and placed the first piece of proof on the table, the look on her face was everything I had imagined and more. Surprise, then confusion, then panic. The practiced calm cracked like glass. Words that once flowed so easily became brittle fragments. She tried to weave new stories, but the net of facts I'd cast was already taut. That's the paradox of a well-planned truth. It doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like justice. It feels like the last honest thing you do for yourself. So yes, I smiled. I let her believe she had the upper hand. Because the sweetest part of all wasn't watching her fall. It was knowing I'd built the ground she fell from. For weeks, I became something I never thought I would be. Patient. Meticulous. Almost clinical. I lived two lives at once. The life I continued to show her. The life of someone still in love and willing to forgive. And the private life of a quiet detective tracing the edges of a story that didn't add up. It started with the small things. A screenshot here, a saved voice note there, a message that disappeared and then reappeared when I checked her phone history. Little breadcrumbs that looked meaningless alone, but together began to form a trail. I learned to read the spaces between her words, the punctuation she left out when she was hiding something, the timestamps that contradicted the stories she told me. I learned her rhythm and where it faltered. She wasn't just lying to me. That would have been awful enough. She was lying to him too. She'd perfected the art of being two people at once. The soft, attentive girlfriend I knew. Warm, patient, always there, and the other version of herself who laughed a different laugh, used different jokes, and kept separate plans that never overlapped with mine. Two lives, two routines, two sets of explanations, tailored carefully so neither of her worlds would collide. When you watch someone live a double life, at first it feels like watching a play. The set is different for each act, and she steps on and off stage without missing a beat. But plays end. Curtains fall. The danger is that when someone forgets which role they're in, the lines get mixed up, and that's where truth slips through. I started connecting the dots. Hours, she said, were spent at home, lined up with photos on social media showing her somewhere else. Messages vanished only to reappear in backups. Calls labeled as work were recorded in places that weren't workplaces at all. Little contradictions multiplied until they multiplied no more. They became a pattern. a design. So I othered everything, not out of obsession, but out of necessity. I took screenshots of conversations that betrayed casual affection I hadn't seen directed toward me. I saved voicemails with laughter that clearly belonged to an evening she had said she spent alone. I noted locations and times, matching them against receipts and check-ins I could find. I printed things, yes, printed, and made piles I could hold in my hands, because holding facts felt steadier than holding air. I didn't rush to show anyone. Proof is a fragile thing. Handled in public, it can be reframed as paranoia, so I kept it close, private, methodical. I organized messages into timelines. I lined up photos next to dates. I wrote down every excuse she'd ever given and placed the contradicting facts beside them. The pile grew, and with it, my confidence. Not the loud, vengeful kind, but a quieter certainty that the truth was no longer a rumor I carried in my gut. It was an object I could point to. There is something oddly intimate about collecting the proof of someone's deceit. You become familiar with their voice in a new way. You notice the sly patterns, how she delayed replies on purpose, how she'd switch from "I miss you" to "I'm busy" in a heartbeat, how she used the same lines with different people, only slightly altered so they wouldn't sound identical. It felt like learning a language I never wanted to know. And here's the thing about liars. They are confident because they assume you will keep believing. They rely on your desire for normalcy. They rely on the kindness that refuses to look too closely. They count on your reluctance to dismantle what feels safe. But they forget that confidence makes them careless. When you let someone be careless for long enough, their mistakes pile up. They leave prints. The more proof I gathered, the more the picture sharpened. It wasn't just a single betrayal now. It was an entire architecture of deception. There were timelines showing overlaps that couldn't be excused. There were messages that read like vows used in two different conversations. There were tiny private jokes in one thread that appeared, oddly, in another with a different name attached. It looked deliberate. It looked practiced. As the evidence mounted, so did my strategy. I thought about how easy it would be to explode everything on social media and force her to explain herself publicly. I imagined the drama, the spectacle, but that felt cheap. I wanted the truth to land where it would matter, not as a viral moment, but as an undeniable reality in the lives of the people she used. I wanted her to face the consequences in a place where she could no longer blink and change the script. So I refined my plan. I considered timing. When people are most likely to be present, when her defenses are low, when the cognitive dissonance would be sharpest. I gathered witnesses, people who had no stake in the drama, but whose accounts would corroborate the facts. I prepared myself to stay composed. I rehearsed the words I would use because I knew that rage could make even the most solid evidence sound like a rant. I wanted the facts to speak, and I wanted them to speak cleanly. The building tension was almost physical. I found myself smiling at small things again, going through the motions of our life together while my other self kept the ledger of truth. There were nights when the burden of what I knew pressed against my ribs, making sleep thin and brittle. There were moments when guilt threatened to seep back. Was I invading privacy? Was I being unreasonable? Each time, I'd go back to the stack of proof and let the facts answer for me. And beneath it all, there was a quieter feeling, a reclaiming. Gathering the evidence and connecting the dots wasn't just about catching her. It was about taking back control. For too long, she had controlled the narrative. She had shaped how I saw us. By turning those shapes into documents, timelines, and printable proof, I stopped being a character in her story and started being an author of my own. I'll never forget the night I finished. I spread the last set of messages across the table, the final piece that tied the whole pattern together. It was a small thing, almost laughable if you didn't know the weight it carried. A photo with a location tag, time-stamped in the middle of the night, sent to a name that wasn't mine. That one image connected 3 prior clues and completed the sequence. The net was closed. With her double life trapped in my hands, the plan sharpened to a single aim: make the truth unavoidable. Not to humiliate, not to destroy for pleasure, but to ensure that the lies could no longer be braided into the comfortable story she'd told us all. When the moment came, there would be nowhere left for her to improvise. Every defense she had rehearsed would clash against a wall of facts, the suspense built like pressure behind a dam. I could feel the tremor before the crack. I knew there was no turning back. I had what I needed. The rest was patience, and the confidence that when I finally set the evidence down in front of her, her practiced smile, so polished, so effortless, would shatter into something I'd never seen before. And when that happened, the silence afterward would say everything. The evening was ordinary on the surface. Soft light, warm plates, the kind of quiet that makes small talk sound like a secret. I chose the restaurant for its privacy, a corner table where we wouldn't be overheard, and where the lighting hid nothing and revealed everything. She arrived in the same easy way she always did, a practiced smile, a quick kiss, the casual shrug of someone who expected nothing to go wrong. She thought it was just another dinner. She thought we were back in the safe rhythm of us. She was relaxed. That was the advantage I needed. Across the table, I folded my hands and let the moment stretch. I watched the way her fingers played with the stem of her glass, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, small habits I'd memorized. I listened to the soft music in the background, letting it fill the space between us so my voice wouldn't sound theatrical when it needed to be clear. Then I smiled, not a smile that forgave, not a smile that made peace. It was the smile of someone who carries a calm that's been earned, not given. It was the smile of someone who had gathered facts and found the courage to use them. "I have something to show you," I said, low enough that only she could hear. My voice didn't shake. It felt oddly steady, like the click of a lock closing. She blinked. For a second, a shadow passed over her face. Maybe she thought I'd decided to talk about us, about feelings, about reconciliation. Maybe she thought I'd finally break. Whatever she imagined, it didn't include the slow, deliberate motion I made next. I reached into my coat and pulled out the first piece of proof, a phone screen, a screenshot pinned to my notes, a small tablet of truth. I laid it on the table between us. The image glowed politely under the candlelight. A picture of her hand intertwined with another man's, time-stamped on a night she said she'd spent alone. The evidence didn't scream. It simply existed. Her face changed. Color drained from her cheeks as if the room had been subtly rewired. Her breath hitched, a tiny, involuntary rhythm that betrayed the practiced calm. For a heartbeat, I thought she might crumble. Instead, she tried to rewrite the moment. "Maybe that's," she started, the rehearsed softness she'd used to change narratives slipping into place. "It's not what it looks like." I didn't need her to tell me what she wanted to be. I already knew the contours of the excuses she kept in reserve. So I placed another item on the table, unhurried, almost tender in the way I revealed it. A string of messages. Affectionate lines sent in the small hours, labeled with times that cut through the story she'd given me. One after another, I set them down, like chapters in a book she'd been writing for 2 different readers. With each piece I added, the theater of her composure unraveled a fraction more. Her lips trembled, hands hovering like someone trying to catch a dropped glass before it shatters. She fumbled words, then swallowed them. The lies she'd told so confidently in private now had to face the quiet, relentless language of evidence. People expect a confrontation to be fierce. They imagine shouting, accusations flung like dishes. But the most devastating reckonings are quieter. Facts hold gravity. Timelines have weight. When you press proof into the middle of a conversation, the room itself seems to lean in. I laid down the third proof, a receipt with a location that contradicted her "I stayed in" story. The fourth was a voice note saved from a message thread she thought she had deleted, laughter in the background that matched the bar photo from 2 nights before. One by one, the pieces assembled into a picture she could no longer edit in real time. She tried to stitch an explanation together, small stitches of contrition and blame and bewilderment. She called it a misunderstanding. She suggested alternative interpretations. She did everything a practiced liar does: pivot, distract, appeal to your memory of the good times. But truth has an obstinate clarity. It refuses to be bent into versions that suit whoever speaks loudest. I watched her face move through the stages. Surprise first, then calculation, then panic. Her eyes darted, looking for allies in the room, for an escape route, for a line that would buy her time. For the first time since I'd known her, the practiced smile she used like armor had holes in it. That was when the silence really did its work. Words were her tool. Without them, she was exposed. She opened her mouth to lie again. That reflex was the most telling thing of all. Habit is a hard teacher. But this time I was ready. I placed the last piece down carefully, deliberately. A small printed timeline I'd made, neat and clinical. Dates and locations matched to messages and photos. It showed what she'd done and when she'd done it, laid out like a map with no room for interpretation. It was the net she could no longer wriggle out of. There was a long, strange pause. The restaurant noise continued around us like a distant sea. Other people's laughter sounded suddenly obscene. Her eyes filled with that look I'd hoped I'd never see. The raw, human panic of someone who knows the game is up. She fumbled for something. An accusation, a plea, a tear. But the words refused to come together in the way she needed them to. It wasn't dramatic. It was small and awful, like watching a carefully arranged painting lose its varnish and flake away. "You're wrong," she whispered finely, brittle as glass. I shook my head once. "No," I said softly. "I'm not wrong. I just waited until the truth spoke." My voice didn't gloat. It didn't need to. There was a steadiness in it that felt more final than any shout. For the first time since we met, she was speechless. Not stunned by fate or broken by grief, but stripped of the one instrument she used to keep the world bending to her will: language. She had always spoken her reality into being with practiced lines and confident shifts of blame. That night, she had no script left to read. She searched my face, looking for the man she thought I was, the one who would plead, who would be ashamed, who would forgive. In his place, I sat steady, a stranger who owned his own story. It was an unfamiliar look for her, and perhaps that was the cruelest part. She had trained me into a role and then been surprised when I stepped out of it. When I stood up to leave, I didn't make a spectacle. I folded the proofs into a neat pile, like a book closed after the last page. I left the table, my chair scraping once, the sound slicing through the hush. Behind me, I felt her eyes, frantic and bewildered. She reached for my wrist, an old gesture that had once calmed me, and I let my hand go. Outside, the air was cool and clear. The city moved on, indifferent. I walked away, not because I wanted to punish her in public, but because I no longer wanted to share the small normalities she'd made hollow. The reckoning had been delivered. The evidence had spoken. The rest was up to her conscience, a thing I could no longer fix for her. That night, I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone you once loved stumble. But there was a hard, undeniable relief in knowing the truth had been laid down, clean and unavoidable. The silence that followed her loss of words was louder than any argument I could have started. It was the sound of truth settling into place. She begged. The sound of it was small and urgent, like a voice dropped into a well and then pulled back up, desperate for air. She reached across the table with hands that shook, not from cold, but from the sudden realization that the rules had changed and the safety net she always depended on was gone. She tried to twist the story. Her words tried to fold around the facts like paper around a shape, staying smooth on the outside while hiding the edges. She blamed misunderstandings, bad timing, people who'd taken things out of context. She pointed at other names and threads and tried to make them into scapegoats. She suggested coincidences, accidents, misread messages. She did everything she'd always been so good at. Pivot, charm, redirect. She even tried to cry. I could see the effort in the wetness of her eyes, the rehearsal of emotion. The tear that fell was convenient, time to interrupt the cold rhythm of truth. But there was a hollowness to it, a performance that made the tears feel like props. When your instrument is manipulation, sorrow can become a script. I'd been fooled before by that script. Not again. But here's the strange thing about truth. It doesn't care how passionately you perform. It doesn't soften for lipstick tears or smooth over polished excuses. Truth sits there, patient and unblinking, like an evidence board that refuses to be rearranged. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't flail with accusations or throw the proofs across the table. There was no need. The facts were heavy enough. Every screenshot, every timestamp, every voice note acted like a small, merciless tide. They pulled the shore of her stories away, inch by inch, until nothing was left but bare rock. I watched her try to spin another web, and I felt a calm settle over me. Not cold, but clear. It's strange how composure can feel like strength. When you let anger run you, you hand your power to reaction. When you don't, your power becomes choice. That night I chose silence and dignity over noise. You lied to my face, I said, plain as winter, my voice even. The words landed softly and with finality. Over and over. She opened her mouth, ready with another practiced line, the reflex of a lifetime of spinning narratives. But before she could speak, I continued, not to berate, not to gloat, only to mark the end. But this time, I said, you can't escape it. This time, the game is over. The phrase wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It hung in the air like a verdict. You could see the moment it reached her, the flicker, the stutter, the tiny aftershock across her face when the weight of what I said met the weight of what I'd shown. And then, I walked away. Walking away felt like the last honest thing left to do. In stories, revenge is often imagined as fireworks, public destruction, shouts, exposure for the crowd. But the real, enduring kind of revenge is quieter. It's the decision to reclaim your time and dignity. It's the refusal to be an audience to your own humiliation. It's the act of exiting the stage while the other person is still searching for a cue. When I stood, I folded the evidence into a neat stack. Not like a threat, but like a final piece of work completed. I didn't slam it down. I didn't fling it to make noise. I let it sit there, solid and undeniable, where everyone at our table could see. The way it lay was a punctuation. The truth had been set down, neat and factual. There was no sensory spectacle. No need, her hands reached. She mouthed my name as if the sound itself could reel me back. But I felt a new, unfamiliar thing. No hunger for reconciliation, no craving to soothe. There was only a clear, wide space where sorrow used to be. The silence I left behind had a shape, like a footprint on fresh plaster. It was the kind of silence that means a lesson has been learned, perhaps by her, more certainly by me. Outside, the night air was sharp. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars hummed. People passed. Somewhere in the background, a laugh rose and fell, insensitive to the small personal earthquake I'd just set off. For a second, I resented that indifference. Then I realized it was a mercy. Life doesn't stop for anyone's drama, and that was the point. My life would not stop for hers anymore. On the walk home, my steps did not feel hollow. They felt deliberate. Each one was a small act of reclaiming ground I had given away. The part of me that had been blurred by betrayal came into sharper focus. The plan I'd built hadn't been about humiliation. It had been about restoration. I was restoring my right to truth, my right to be treated with honesty. Later, people would ask me if I felt satisfaction. They would picture the moment as a cinematic triumph and wonder if I celebrated with a shout. But the closest thing to victory I felt was small and private, a settling in my chest, the quiet knowledge that I had not let her define the end of my story. I had closed that chapter on my own terms. There are few things more humbling than watching a person you loved lose their armor. It's not pleasurable to see someone panic, to watch the practiced confidence fall away, but there is an unfair justice to it. The people who spend years perfecting a mask often don't notice the cracks until they're wide enough to walk through. That night, the cracks were big enough for both of us to see. In the days after, she sent messages I never opened. She called, left voicemails, showed up at places she thought I'd be. Her attempts to rebuild the narrative were earnest and frantic, but they felt like echoes in an empty room. Words without trust are just sounds. They have no weight. The real fall was not in the moment she couldn't speak. It was the aftershock, the way others saw her differently when they traced the facts she'd failed to hide. It was the quiet, reputational erosion that comes from being caught in a pattern of deceit. People forgive sometimes. Sometimes they don't. But most importantly, I forgave myself. I stopped being the person who accepted convenient excuses and started being someone who demanded honesty. The sweetest revenge, I learned, is not staying to watch them fall. It's leaving them with nothing but the echo of their own lies. When you walk away, you give them space to face themselves without your help. Sometimes the silence you leave behind is the loudest lesson of all. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not silent in the world outside. Life went on with its usual noise, but quiet inside me. The storm that had raged for weeks, the questions, the doubts, the gnawing unease, was gone. In its place was something steadier, something calmer. She tried, of course. The messages came first. Little ones at odd hours, please just talk to me. You don't understand. It's not what you think. We can fix this, can't we? Then came the calls. Long, insistent, one after another until my phone felt heavy in my hand. Sometimes she left voicemails, her voice trembling, switching between anger, sorrow, and sweetness. Like she was trying on masks, hoping one of them would pull me back in. But I didn't answer. I didn't give her the stage. I didn't give her the satisfaction of another chance to weave new lies. Because this time, it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I had spent so much energy trying to believe her, trying to hold together a story that was already broken, that I'd forgotten the most important truth. I deserved better, so I focused on myself, on rebuilding, on learning to trust my instincts again, on surrounding myself with people who valued honesty instead of playing games. And slowly, piece by piece, I grew stronger. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. There were nights I replayed her words in my head, nights when the betrayal still stung like an open wound. But every morning I reminded myself, she didn't destroy me. She revealed me. She showed me the strength I didn't know I had, the patience to wait, the courage to confront, and the discipline to walk away, because in the end, it wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming myself. I deserve honesty. I deserve peace. I deserve love that doesn't come with conditions, with secrets, with double lives. And her? She was left with her lies, her empty games, her double life crumbling in her own hands. The thing about living behind a mask is that eventually, it sticks. And when the mask falls, you're left with nothing, no trust, no stability. No one to turn to. I didn't need to see her fall. I didn't need to watch her struggle with the mess she'd made. I already knew. Because deep down, she will never forget the moment. The moment her lies stopped working. The moment her games ended. The moment she looked across the table and realized the truth had finally caught up with her. If there's one thing this whole story taught me, it's that people are complicated, more complicated than the roles they play for us. Sometimes, the people who smile the brightest hide the darkest things. Sometimes, the ones who say, "Trust me," the loudest are the ones you should be most careful with. That's a bitter lesson, but a useful one. Lies are loud at first. They're clever. They move fast and they demand your attention. But lies don't have stamina. They don't breathe. They run out of air. Sooner or later, the rhythm breaks, the pattern slips, and the truth starts to show through. When that happens, it won't politely tap on the door. It will break it down. Clear, messy, unavoidable. If you've been lied to, believe me, your first instinct might be anger. That's normal. Hurt is honest. But anger left alone will often lead you into mistakes. It will make you do things you'll regret. The better path, harder, quieter, and more powerful, is to move from anger to clarity. Collect the facts. Protect your dignity. Choose actions that rebuild you instead of actions that break someone else. Revenge, as people picture it, looks dramatic. But the real, lasting kind of revenge is simple. It's freedom. It's the work you do to stop letting someone else write your story. It's the moment you decide that you will not be shaped by their deceit anymore. That's not cruelty. That's survival. That's integrity. So if you're sitting where I sat, confused, betrayed, wondering what to do, start with this. Breathe. Don't rush to strike or to broadcast. Let your decisions be measured and honest. Build proof if you need it, but don't let evidence turn you into someone you don't want to be. Hold your head up. Protect your heart. And most of all, choose your peace. There's dignity in walking away. There's strength in silence. When you leave someone to face their own lies without fueling the drama, you take back power quietly and completely. You show them, without screaming or gloating, that their games no longer touch you. That silence, that steady composure, often says more than any accusation ever could. In the end, the story wasn't only about catching her. It was about learning to value myself enough to insist on honesty. It was about realizing that love doesn't have to break you to prove itself. It was about understanding that being betrayed doesn't make you weak. Surviving it and choosing better makes you wiser. If you ever find yourself betrayed, remember this. Revenge isn't about hurting them. It's about freeing yourself. Reclaim your time, your trust, and your life. Build a future where honest people belong and liars don't get a seat at your table. And if you ever cross paths with someone who once lied to you, let your calm be your answer. Let your life be your lesson. Because the most devastating thing you can offer a liar is a quiet life lived well. And that silence will, without fail, leave them speechless.